Think of how different these phones used to be. Back when hardware was the bragging point of the Galaxy line, bigger screen, removable battery, water resistance, the iPhone and Galaxy line were polar opposites in almost every facet. Fast forward a few years, and they boast almost identical hardware perks, which leaves it down to the details to determine which phone is right for you. Let's check it out. Okay, so story time. So in the morning when my alarm goes off for school or for whatever, my brain is working at like 10% capacity. But when I was using the S9 as my alarm clock, it was going off, but then it was also reading off the time as it was doing that. And I was like, whoa, that actually helps. Like, it helped me comprehend what was going on, and I just realized what time it was. And that was a really cool feature for me. It's something I couldn't do on the iPhone and that I haven't been able to find in any third-party apps. But that was baked right into the Samsung app for the alarm clock, and that was really cool. I think that's the moral of the story between these two phones. As the hardware has converged over the years, it's really about the small things, the experience, and the details that make these phones different and what you really have to consider. Objectively, the S9 is a narrower, taller phone, so it's easier to go side to side, harder to go up and down. The iPhone X is a little bit wider, not too much, but a little bit wider, but shorter so that it's easier to reach the top corner. So depending on what style you like, both have its pros and cons, but there's a slight build difference. Additionally, in terms of hardware, the iPhone X really is just rocking a few things. We have the power button that has a lot of functions. It uses it for Siri, for turning it on and off, for Apple Pay and things like that. You have your volume buttons, and then you have your mute toggle, which is actually really handy. Although I never really take it out of the mute position, it's a really foolproof way of making sure you have your notifications exactly where you want them. And then you have Face ID to unlock your phone. It's not fantastic, but it works well and it's consistent and it's reliable, and I have no issues with Face ID on the iPhone X, although I wish there was a fingerprint sensor. And that's where the S9 comes in, where you do have the iris scanner to unlock your phone, and it's not perfect, but it works well enough to unlock your phone fairly consistently, sometimes a little bit slowly, and sometimes you have to be really direct with it. But then you also have a fingerprint scanner, so you can unlock it with that. And that's what I do most of the time, so it's great to have those options. And that's definitely a benefit of the S9, is just having both. And then the Bixby button, which, I mean, I turned off the functionality because I really don't use Bixby and didn't find it very useful or practical when you have Google Now built in. Now, a big point for the S9 would also be the headphone jack. This doesn't affect me. I use my AirPods all the time. I use Bluetooth for basically everything now, but for people that do use headphone jacks or aux or whatever, having the headphone jack is awesome because both of these phones are water resistant, but this still does have the headphone jack, so it's definitely a big point. Now, further experience points would really vary device to device. So the iPhone X, of course, has the notch, which is its trademark feature. It doesn't really bother me at all that it has that. It doesn't really disrupt content unless you're watching video, and even then, sometimes it's not a big deal. But you do get so much screen. Almost the entire front is screen, which can still be said about the S9. It's mostly screen, but you do have the top and bottom bezels. And because this doesn't operate on gestures, you do still have the status bar or the menu bar on the bottom, which takes up precious screen real estate. I'm not a fan of that. While it may be changing with the gestures with an Android update if it ever gets it, currently you do have to have that status bar at the bottom, that menu bar, which does take up real estate. You can hide it, but then you have to swipe up to use it. Whereas the iPhone X really gets experience points with its gestures. They're super intuitive, and while I didn't like them at first, they work very well for swiping between apps, getting into multitasking, or going home. They work very well. For not having a home button, the iPhone X does a great job. But then, of course, Android has its perks. So I really like the clock feature, as I told you, waking up and having the alarm tell you what time it is. I do like the quick action bar that you can swipe over. So just with a swipe over, I can get access to a bunch of really quick and really handy things, and that's really convenient. Of course, there are other things. There's an always on display, which is really nice for quickly seeing notifications, things like that. Android has a lot of features. It has a lot of customizations. Nothing of this is new or something you haven't heard before. That's just the advantage. And because it's so open and widespread, though, you do have your issues where the iPhone X and iOS really comes into play, and that would be app quality. Day after day, I would use apps on iPhone over the S9. While it doesn't have multitasking on here, you can't have two apps open at once, which may be a reason to go for something like the S9. The apps are just so much better. Instagram, Twitter, even a lot of Google apps, they're just so much better and more optimized for the iPhone. Snapchat, for instance, is just night and day difference. It's really hard to use apps consistently on Android. I've never been a huge fan of Android, because of app support. That's really the one thing that holds me back. You know, iMessage and iCloud is awesome on the iPhone, and the app quality are so much better. Just scrolling through Instagram, everything is optimized better for the iPhone than it is for Android. And you can't really argue that, and that's a big difference for me. Then of course there's everything else. Both displays are absolutely beautiful, and really unless you're nitpicking, I could use either and not have an issue, really. The cameras are both great. The S9 does have the variable aperture, which is very cool and kind of bleeding edge technology for smartphone cameras that really helps out in low light, but I don't think the average consumer is going to go into that pro mode and use that larger aperture for low light shots. They might, but in general, both of these phones produce awesome images. The S9 does have an awesome feature, which I think is underrated. Super slow-mo is so cool, and while it's not going to be great resolution, it's still awesome that it's there, and I love that Samsung is packing that in. That's one of those features I think is truly underrated with the S9. Battery life is going to be similar with both. Both will get you through mostly a full day. I get a little bit better battery life with the S9 than I do with the 10. This will die, 4 or 5 p.m. It really varies depending on how I use it, summer or school. And the S9 is a little bit better, but the thing is the S9 has faster wireless charging. This kind of drags by. It has up to 7.5 watts wireless charging. This has up to 10 watts Qualcomm Quick Charge 3. So this is going to charge faster with USB-C. That's one of the advantages here, and gets experience points because this charges much quicker wirelessly. That's, it makes it almost feasible to use this and charge wirelessly, whereas this is pretty slow. But it definitely has charging points, so even if the battery was inferior, it has more charging options and faster charging options, which is always a perk. So in day-to-day operations, the S9 is a fantastic phone. It just has convenience points. It has the headphone jack, it has the fingerprint scanner, it has Android with all of its additional features, faster charging, it has a little bit better water resistance to it, and it just has a lot of features that the iPhone can't compare to, including some cameras with a lot more options and more customizations and more pro modes. However, the iPhone 10 has iOS, which has its advantage of better apps, better app support, better software updates. I like the notch in this context better with the multi-touch and swipe gestures. Portrait mode on the iPhone 10 has gotten a lot better with iOS 12, and of course you're gonna get software updates. At the end of the day, I'm using the iPhone 10 because it works with my life and iMessage and all of that kind of stuff, but it's really the app support that does it for me. This is a great phone, and this does have a big advantage of being significantly cheaper, which is awesome, and with expandable storage, you can really get this for significantly cheaper than the iPhone 10. If you're on a budget, I don't have a problem recommending the S9 to you. If you don't have a budget and you're just looking for the best experience, this is still barely the best experience because the apps are much better. However, as soon as these apps start getting a little bit better on the S9, that's really going to take the cake because of all the extra features you get, and it's just a really powerful phone. Either way, you can't go wrong. These are both flagship phones for different price points and different features, but the hardware is so similar that it really comes down to the experience. Both have great experience, but it's really up to you to which one you want. Now, if you liked any of the awesome cases shown throughout this video, these are all from RhinoShield, testing out the new solid suit lineup, which has 10 feet drop protection, like guaranteed 10 feet drop protection, with really stylish options, not just for the 10 and the S9, but a lot of different phones. You can get 10% off with my discount code, and the designs are seriously awesome. The cases look great, they feel really good, and on the iPhone model, you can have attachable lenses onto your camera, as well as customizing the buttons to get the exact color. So if you want to get a black button to match your wolf on your case, you can do that. These are awesome cases. I'll leave a link down below